Welcome to the Postpartum Performance Podcast. If you're here to be empowered and encouraged, you're in the right place. I believe every woman deserves to learn who's in her corner, which is why this podcast was created, to share encouragement and intentional conversations around women's health, nutrition, and wellness for new mothers. In each episode, we will discuss ways for women to find truth for her health, to feel strong, and to be confident from the inside out. I'm your host, Dr. Lindsay Peczkowski, a performance physical therapist with a passion for teaching others about pelvic health and guiding mothers to build movement, confidence, and strength. I'm a lover of running and weightlifting and a healthy cooking enthusiast. All right, ladies, grab your coffee and settle in for an episode of the Postpartum Performance Podcast. Are you with me? Here we go. Hey ladies, welcome back to the Postpartum Performance Podcast. Today on the show, we have Dr. Reena Singh, and we talk about fertility and preconception and hormones and so much more. There's so much great information in this episode. Please listen and pass along to all the ladies that you know. A little bit more about Dr. Reena. Dr. Reena Singh is a naturopathic doctor who specializes in women's health. She focuses on the three main stages of a woman's life: puberty, fertility, and menopause. She is especially passionate about helping women to optimize their health for conception and a healthy baby. Dr. Singh believes many health issues are a result of nutritional or metabolic imbalances along with an environmental insult. She works to identify the specific imbalances and then addresses the root cause. Many women are prescribed medications or pushed into procedures which only suppress symptoms but does not address the root cause. She works to rebalance and optimize the system so that a woman can feel and look her best, conceive easily, and age with grace. She works with women who want to address their health concerns naturally and address the root cause. Ladies, such a good episode we've got for you. Without further ado, let's dive into the show. All right, Dr. Reena Singh, we have her on the show. Welcome to the Postpartum Performance Podcast. So excited to have you on the show today and to really dive into fertility, infertility, and so much more. So welcome to the show. I'm looking forward to this.
Thank you so much for having me. I am too. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. So if you would share a little bit about yourself personally, professionally, so our audience gets to know you, and then we'll start diving into some topics.
Perfect. Yeah. So my name is Dr. Reena Singh. I am a licensed naturopathic doctor, and I specialize and focus on women's health. And so I focus on younger women who are going through their kind of puberty transition. I also focus on optimizing a woman's body for fertility, conception, a healthy pregnancy, and then, of course, the third transition, perimenopause and menopause. And so as a woman, we're kind of defined by our hormones, and we're either transitioning into or out of one of these three stages. And so I'm really passionate about helping women with their health. And I'm super passionate about, helping to bring healthy babies into this world. And how I got into this was with my own health story. And what led me to becoming a naturopathic doctor was my own diagnosis with ulcerative colitis in my early 20s when I was in college. And, just the severe inflammatory bowel disease. And I was put on medications, and I was told that I was going to have to take these medications the rest of my life, and that I would likely get cancer in my 30s, and that having kids was not a very high possibility. So that was a lot to take in.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
As a young woman, early, college kid. But of course I was scared, and I did what they told me to do. So I took the medications, which helped to suppress the symptoms, but didn't really help me get well. Mm-hmm. And so after a few years of kind of on that roller coaster ride of medications and side effects, and those triggering some hormonal imbalances, like I was just looking for another way. And luckily I found natural medicine, and then just pursued that and started kind of following what my natural medicine doctor told me at the time, and was just amazed at the kind of the results I was getting in a short period of time in terms of just my body regaining some balance after I gave it what it needs. Mm-hmm. And that was just so empowering. And so when once I went through that myself and reversed my ulcerative colitis diagnosis that they told me I was going to have forever, I was just like, oh my gosh, I have to share this with everyone because I reversed that disease. I then went on to, go on to have two healthy kids myself in my late 30s. And so I was like, this is what I have to do. And so I changed career paths and became a naturopathic doctor so I can help other women just feel more empowered and take charge of their health.
I love that. I love that you took your own personal experience and then found that you're like, there is such a need to get this message out there, and how your practice kind of takes people through all of those three stages, or women, kind of those big stages of life, and based off of hormones and based off of different health needs. So I think that's so important, to get the word out. And so I'm glad that you're on the show to share so much more. So how did you kind of dive into, because you do a lot of like fertility work, and working with people with like fertility. So I would love for you to dive into a little bit on preconception, because I think that's something that's not always addressed until it becomes a problem of like, you can't get pregnant or something like that. And so what would be some advice or ways to kind of optimize preconception if you're even like someday wanting to have kids? Like, it doesn't have to be like, oh, we're planning on trying right now or anything like that. But how would you even just have that conversation, or like some advice that you would give to some people that if they're thinking in the next couple of years, or we were talking before, like teenagers and stuff too. So even
Yes.
just like what would you recommend where to start?
I love that you're asking this question because that is my like wish for every young couple or just any couple that is considering having a baby, 3, 6 months, a year, 2 years, 5 years down the road, because the more that a woman can do prior to conception to optimize her health will not only help her get pregnant easier and have a healthy pregnancy, but have the healthiest baby possible. And we now know from lots of medical research that mom and dad's health prior to conception can make all the difference in terms of ability to get pregnant, the health of that pregnancy, and of course, most importantly, the health of that baby.
Mm-hmm.
And so I so wish more couples would think along those lines and be like, oh yeah, we don't want to get pregnant tomorrow, but
Mm-hmm.
down the road, like what can we start doing? And there's so many things. There's so many things you can start doing. And so, for example, some of the really common issues that I see that could be addressed prior to, waiting until there's an issue, like you mentioned, are nutrient deficiencies. So if there are any specific nutrient deficiencies going on in the body, B vitamins, folate, zinc, vitamin D, there's just a plethora, right, of different nutrients that those eggs in your ovaries need to grow and be nourished and surrounded by, so that during their growth phase, they're living in the environment that they need to flourish.
Mm-hmm.
Because one thing that a lot of women don't realize is that egg that you might ovulate tomorrow, like let's say you wanted to start trying and you were going to ovulate tomorrow, that egg actually started on its journey 3 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
Its active phase. It actually
Mm-hmm.
started on its journey about a year ago, but its active growth phase started about 3 months ago. So you have immense opportunity to influence the quality of those follicles, of those eggs, by ensuring that your body has the nutrients it needs. And that doesn't necessarily mean going out and taking a whole bunch of like supplements and things like that. It's actually taking it further back than that. It's like, okay, are you digesting and absorbing your nutrients as efficiently
Mm-hmm.
as you could be? Because that's something I see so commonly, is that a woman, even if she's eating a pretty clean diet, I'll analyze her blood work and I'll be like, whoa, I can see that there are some patterns of poor absorption, poor nutrient uptake. And so if those nutrients aren't getting absorbed, how in the world are they going to get to those tiny little follicles in the
Yeah.
ovaries, right?
Yeah.
And then that can lead to other issues, and for egg quality, for embryo quality, things like that. And so digestion is huge. And IBS, which is irritable bowel syndrome, is one of the most common issues that women of reproductive age have. It is it's one of the most common reasons they go in to see the doctor. Like they just don't, their digestion isn't right, their stomach doesn't feel right. And we now know that women who have IBS are at an increased risk for conception issues, for miscarriages, and things like that. So it makes so much sense to just take a step back, focus on the gut, see what's going on there. So that's number one. I would definitely start there. And another big area would be thyroid function. So that's a lot of times not addressed or found out that there's an issue until women are trying to conceive and there is an issue. But just getting a simple blood test and getting a complete thyroid panel well ahead of time, just to see if there's anything going on there, can provide so much information as to, okay, are there things we need to start working on? Because again, we don't just need to go out and take thyroid medication or a bunch of supplements, because the thyroid is so dependent on other systems in the body, the gut, the adrenals, blood sugar. And so understanding what's going on with the thyroid and then addressing the root cause of what may be inhibiting the way the thyroid is working, and addressing those things is so immensely important. Because again, if there's any issue, if there's any level of hypothyroidism, which means that the thyroid just isn't working as well as it should be, or if a woman has antibodies to her thyroid, which is so common, unfortunately, it's so common. If there's any of those things going on, that can also then lead a woman to have issues with conception, and or increased risk for miscarriage. And so just understanding what's going on with your body well ahead of time, just getting a thorough, complete blood work analysis done, just kind of seeing what's going on, can provide so much insight. You know, if there's an issue and where to focus on. And so that's what I always recommend, because you don't want to wait to the point where it's now the only message you're getting is like, oh, there's no more time. You better start these medications. You better consider IVF or IUI. Because from what I've seen, there is a world of things that can be done before getting to those steps, those kind of more invasive type steps.
Yeah. So definitely laying the groundwork, and even having those blood work and like the thyroid panels and all of those things done before. I've found with people that I've worked with too, it's been really helpful for them to have those as reference, so that when they do get pregnant and they do have more of those tests coming through when they are actually pregnant, because baby's taking a lot of nutrients and different things too, to make sure that if things look different from what their previous numbers were, and things will shift during pregnancy naturally, but if things are shifting a little bit more to one side or the other, it's like, oh, this isn't your normal. Okay. So like, let's see what's going on, or even after postpartum, because again, hormones are all over the place. So having even just that baseline is so important.
100%. Yeah. Because if a woman is depleted or deficient prior to pregnancy, that is going to set the stage for a not so fun pregnancy, number one. The baby may not be getting all the nutrients and building blocks, or baby's going to take what baby needs and mom's going to be even more depleted. That's typically what happens. But then what happens is, if a mom enters pregnancy feeling so depleted, postpartum issues are so much more intensified, because mom prior to getting pregnant was so depleted, she doesn't have any reserves to pull from after delivering baby. And that's what I have found to be one of the key differentiators in women who have more severe postpartum depression or issues, is that they were just so depleted prior to pregnancy. So you were absolutely right. Like that is so important. And I completely agree. It's like, find out what's going on well ahead of getting before getting pregnant, and repleting what needs to get replete, work on what you need to work on. And then the goal is just smooth sailing after that point.
Absolutely. So some roadblocks, it sounds like, is gut health, for fertility and hormones specifically. What other roadblocks are you seeing with fertility for people, that you're working with, or just in general, if there's any trends that you've noticed?
Yeah. So gut is the big one. That one I see in so many women, even if they don't have symptoms
Mm-hmm.
of gas, bloating, just, not having regular bowel movements. If
Mm-hmm.
you have any of those are definite signs that, okay, you need to work on the gut. But even women who don't have those overt symptoms, when I analyze their blood work, I can see that, oh, you're not absorbing your nutrients sufficiently. So yeah, we have to work on that, because also the the balance of the gut bacteria. So the bacteria that's living in our gut is so important. So if that gets thrown off, that can then influence the health of the placenta, because now our placenta, we now know, also has a balance of bacteria, which is going to be, feeding and nourishing your baby for 9 months. And so if there's anything going on in the gut prior to pregnancy, that can influence the placenta's balance of bacteria and then baby's health. And there's been some correlations with that, with then later issues with baby's health. And so yeah, it's really important. So that's number one. So gut health for sure is number one.
What do you think is the reason for so much of the gut health stuff? Do you think, I mean, I know there's many factors for why gut health can be not optimal, but like, do you think, especially for young women, you were saying that's a really for like IBS and stuff like that. What do you think are some of the causes or
I think there's two
contributing
main
factors?
causes. Yeah. I think number one is our diet, because we don't focus on our food like we should be. And so the nutrients that are in our food are not as dense as they once used to be, like 40, 50, 60 years ago. Our soils don't have the nutrients they once used to. So even if we're eating a super clean diet, we think we're eating the best diet. Unfortunately, the nutrient density of the foods is not where it used to be. That's number one. Yeah. Number two, I mean, young teenage girls, college kids, they're not eating the best diet anyway. So that kind of layers on top of that. So when you're just kind of grabbing food and not really thinking about, oh, how is this impacting my health? How is this impacting my hormones? Things can get thrown off very quickly, very easily. And especially for women, when we don't eat a diet that feeds our gut bacteria, what happens is we then get this, again, going back to the balance of kind of good and bad bacteria, that bad bacteria kind of starts growing. And when that gets off balance, we don't metabolize, we don't break down our estrogens as well as we should be. And so, PMS symptoms, endometriosis, and all those things can just get intensified. And so a lot of women don't realize that what they're eating influences their gut influences their hormones, that can influence their cycle every month. And so that's why it's so important. So yeah, just what we're eating and the quality of food. And then also, I will say that lately, there's this trend for younger women to go vegan, vegetarian, or on some kind of extreme diet. So if we go to any diet that's too extreme, it can, again, throw things off in the body. I'm not saying, a vegan diet's bad, not at all. However, it should be done properly with a balance of the macronutrients, because what happens is a lot of times these young girls, they'll stop eating meat, but then they'll start eating just a bunch of whole, processed grains and
grilled
more. Right, exactly.
Yeah, just like the extreme.
So they're replacing it with not healthy food. And so that's going to throw off their hormones and they don't realize it. And that's unfortunate. So that's huge. So diet, gut, number one. And then number two is stress. So, and when it comes to fertility and women's health in general, this is such a hard topic to have because of course we're all go-getters. We're living in this day and age where women, we want to do things and get things done and we're accomplished and we're just like, go, go, go. And there's a few aspects to that. So that's awesome. That's amazing. And one of my missions in life is to actually kind of educate women on how to use their cycle to their advantage to get more things done. Because there are different phases in our cycle that we are actually more, things are just more clicking better. We're more in tune and we're able to get things done versus like in the later half of our cycle where things are kind of a little bit slower when progesterone's higher and we can be more sleepy at that time. So kind of knowing more about our cycle and how to use it to our advantage is amazing. But going back
I'm
to
so
stress,
intrigued by that stuff. Yeah. It's so interesting.
yeah, isn't it fascinating? Like I just think young girls, like we just need to start that education much younger so they just know about their bodies.
Yeah.
But coming back to stress. So that is huge because living in today's society, I mean, who isn't under stress? We're all under stress. The differentiating factor is how our body responds to that stress because our body's natural response is to elevate cortisol, get us through that stressor, and then come back down to normal and then, go back to this calm state and live in that calm state. Unfortunately, nowadays, we're constantly in a stress state. So we're always up here, right? Yeah. And so what happens is that cortisol that gets elevated stays elevated. Once cortisol stays elevated, guess what? It pulls the attention away from all the other hormones. So our estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, all these hormones that are over here no longer are priority for the system because now cortisol's taken it all. It's called the cortisol seal. And so this can lead to, of course, hormonal imbalance, fertility issues, increased risk of miscarriages, all those kinds of things. And so just helping women to understand what their stressors are, how they can deal with them, how to feel more grounded on a more regular daily basis, just providing more tools to do that. That's a lot of what I do, actually. It's like just helping women to have tools in their toolbox to just get them out of that stressor and kind of bring them back down to a more grounded state. Because when it comes to fertility, if your body is sensing that you're stressed, it's trying to protect you. And fertility is not a priority in that moment because the body's like, whoa, she's kind of stressed out. We don't want to, baby would be even more. So we're going to protect her. We're going to like keep her safe. When all this poor woman wants is like, she wants to get pregnant. She wants a baby, but she doesn't understand or realize that cortisol, that stress is preventing her. And it's a catch-22 because if you're having fertility issues, it causes stress. If you're going through IVF, if you're taking medications, all those things are stressors. Oh. And so really what I tell all my women clients is like, breathing techniques, grounding techniques, and also learning to tap back into our feminine energy, because that's one thing that we've also kind of lost touch with because we're all in this mode of, well, we're just as good as men. We want to do everything as well as men. We want to get everything done, which is amazing. Again, love it. At the same time, though, we are feminine, right? Fertility is a feminine energy. And so what I have women do to kind of tap into the energetic side of all this and support our adrenals and calm the stress level down is to do things that are creative, do things that, making something with your hands, creating something, drawing, just anything that brings you joy that's creative. That'll help kind of feed and tap into that feminine energy without,
great,
while keeping you in balance. So, yeah.
Oh, that's so good. Because I think there definitely is that, not the balance, the imbalance with that, whether that's depending on like your work setting or just the people that you're around or how you respond to stressors with all of that. So that's so important to tune into that and have the tools. Like you were saying, you give women so many tools, because when you're in that heightened stress state, it's so hard to like actually think of like, oh, this is what I should do to help calm myself down, because you're so like tunnel vision in those moments too. And then if someone's kind of living in that state, that's very hard to shift that without having someone kind of giving them tools and insight to that.
100%. Exactly. Yep.
That's so good.
Yeah.
So we were talking about this earlier. So we were talking about setting the stage for fertility, but you also had mentioned, because you work with women across the age range and just with hormones and everything like that, that for listeners that are mothers of teenagers or college age daughters, or also for listeners that are in their like college age, what are some ways to set the stage for fertility? Because I think it's a conversation that, I mean, at that age, you're not necessarily like thinking of fertility for your, like 16-year-old daughter, but it's something that you were mentioning, and I want you to share more about like certain choices of certain other medical things or other things that you're going to be doing with whatever response to symptoms or anything like that can play a role. So I'd love for you to share on that, because I think that's so important.
Yes, I'm so, so glad that we're having this conversation, because one of the things that I have become more aware of as well, just in my practice, is that by working with so many women now who are going through fertility issues, and it's on the rise. We have like 1 in 8 couples have issues getting pregnant. And what is going on, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in my practice of working with these amazing couples who are taking back charge of their health and wanting to do things naturally and then optimize their health, it's also made me realize that there's so many things that have set the stage for these imbalances that started early on, like in the teenage years, in their early 20s. And so there's quite a few things, but we'll just talk about a few today that I think are really important for moms to know about for their young girls or for young women who are, not necessarily thinking about getting pregnant now, of course, but want to do what they can to ensure that fertility won't be an issue later on whenever they're ready to get pregnant. And so I definitely think that, again, diet plays a huge role. So being conscious eaters, just knowing what you're putting into your body and understanding the effects of that food on your health and your hormones is key. Stress, we just talked about for sure. And then, what are some of the other things that are common for women? It's a lot of body image stuff, right? It's a lot of wanting to feel good about ourselves. So whenever skin, right? So if there's any acne, is huge. And that can lead young girls to want to just take anything. And one of the things that I have noticed that's come up a lot recently is because I'm getting a lot more women in their late 20s and who are having issues getting pregnant. And one of the things I've noticed is that all these women were on Accutane in their teens. And I'm like, whoa, what is going on? And there is a correlation between Accutane and then premature ovarian failure. So how many doctors are sharing this, with these young girls before prescribing these medications? I don't know. But my message is there are so many more natural things we can do for acne, skin health, before getting to Accutane. And so just keeping those things in mind, like before jumping to a medication, find out, ask questions. Is there another way? Is there something else I could do? The other thing I've noticed a lot is repeated rounds of antibiotics. Again, it could be for skin stuff, or it could be for recurrent UTIs, or it could be for recurrent sinus infections when these girls were really little or young, or strep throat or things like that. Again, that goes back to the gut, because these recurrent antibiotics that they've been on have completely thrown off their gut bacteria, kind of disrupted their gut flora. That can impact hormones, skin health, reproduction, everything. So it's a domino effect. And this is from personal experience, because this is what, my history with ulcerative colitis and the inflammatory bowel disease, my mom and we didn't know what the signs were. We didn't know, like, not going to the bathroom for days on end was a sign that something was going on. So if you're not going to the bathroom regularly, if they're not well formed and easy to pass, like, yeah, they're not fun conversations, but they're important.
Yeah,
So, and so
absolutely.
those things are really key, I would say. And the other thing too, for young girls, for moms to kind of keep an eye on, is that body image. And it's like, is she restricting her calories? Are we getting into an eating disorder type picture? Just keep being mindful of that, because of course that needs to be addressed in and of itself. But then also for hormonal balance and for future fertility, that is a stressor on the body. That is a huge stressor, and the body will shut down hormones. Cycles, menstrual cycles will go away if there's just not enough caloric intake, if there's not enough nutrients in the body, in the diet, and then especially for fertility. So, I've had to work with women who had prior eating disorders when they were in their teens, and then they had just irregular periods, and then just working on her system to just get that communication back from the brain to the thyroid to the ovaries, so everything kind of gets back online. And another huge topic, which we may have to do a whole separate talk on because it's so big, but is birth control use.
Yes.
So of course, we want our young girls to not have to worry about accidental pregnancies and things like that. So, but at the same time, and of course, birth control pills are also prescribed for skin issues and hormonal imbalances and like all these other things. So number one, it's knowing what it's being prescribed for, because if it's for hormonal imbalances, I am not a fan of putting young girls on birth control pills unless absolutely necessary, because it can absolutely throw off. It shuts down the cycle. They're synthetic hormones. So, girls will think like, oh, my periods are fine. Like, I have perfect periods. They're not real periods though. They're just, they're fake periods that are brought on by synthetic hormones, because what birth control pills do is they shut down your own production of hormones. And when you're not having those natural fluctuations of your own hormones, that can, in some women, depending on how long you've been on birth control pills, it can take months, years for the body to come back online. For some women, it comes back right away, but that doesn't mean that they can get pregnant, because the birth control pill also depletes nutrients. It depletes key vitamins. It downregulates the thyroid. It affects the gut bacteria. It, stops ovulation. So it's working in multiple different ways to prevent pregnancy, because that's their job. But
suppressing so much other stuff.
Exactly. But there are side effects of that. And so understanding and knowing that and balancing between, okay, is it absolutely necessary for what they're being prescribed for, or is there an alternate way? And then of course, if it is for birth control, that's a different conversation. There are, of course, other methods of birth control. But then also, if a woman is going to want to stay on them, then ensuring she's getting regular routine blood work done to make sure these things are not getting too thrown off, taking nutrients at the same time, taking to support her gut and her liver, so that her body's able to process these synthetic hormones, so that, we can have that conversation later on when she gets off of them, when she's ready to get pregnant. So there's a lot,
so
as
much,
women, we have so much to think about all the time.
Absolutely. That's really helpful though. Just even thinking about that for the younger generations, but also just in general, just knowing that, okay, the choices that I'm making today are going to affect things down the road if you have aspirations to start a family and things like that. Or just in general, just overall health, regardless if you're wanting to start a family or not, like hormone health into like older years and stuff like that makes such a difference on longevity and just like quality of life too.
100%. 100%.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Even if fertility is not your future, that's not your thing, it doesn't matter. Hormonal balance for a woman is everything. Those fluctuations, those natural fluctuations that our bodies are meant to have in the key hormones, estrogen and progesterone are the two key main hormones, are so critical for our general health, and how we feel, how we look, what we're able to
So
get done.
much.
Like,
Yeah.
it impacts everything about us. And so, yeah, it's maintaining and working towards hormonal balance is not just for girls or women who want to get pregnant. It's for
Mm-hmm.
all women, because it's it's so important for how we feel and how our body functions.
Mm-hmm.
And our
So,
future health, transitioning, later stages, just
yeah.
transitioning to menopause, and depending on what has been going on up until that point, if things have been out of balance, if there's been inflammation, if there's been blood sugar imbalances, all those can get heightened, intensified during that transition. And then that can lead, and that's what leads to all those symptoms that these poor women are having later on, which don't need to be. Menopause should be a pretty easy transition
Mm-hmm.
without a whole lot of side effects if everything else has been in balance, if the body is repleted, if, things have been taken care of. But for a lot of women, we put all our attention on everybody else for so long
Mm-hmm.
that we neglect ourselves until our body finally like screaming at us, like, oh, wait, focus on me.
Absolutely. So I wanted to kind of shift a little bit direction on kind of sort of a heavy topic, I would say, with miscarriages, and kind of the work that you have seen and done with women. If there's any things, and I know sometimes it's out of people's control on obviously like what happens, but if there's any either advice or things that you've seen or would want to talk about with that conversation and that topic, because I know personally I've had some friends that have experienced miscarriages, multiple ones, and just knowing that it's a tough place to be mentally, let alone just like for your body to go through that too. So kind of what that could look like when it comes to, I mean, all the things that we were talking about, but what that would look like.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And you're right. It's a big topic, and especially for women who have suffered through miscarriage, it can be isolating for many
Mm-hmm.
because they don't want to talk about it and they don't want to share, but they also, are wanting help and support. And what I have noticed is that if when a woman comes to me who's had recurrent miscarriages, it's doing everything that I've talked about so far. It's taking a step back and just assessing, okay, what's going on? Are there nutrient deficiencies? Are there depletions? What's the gut health? Um, Thyroid is a big one. Thyroid, I cannot tell you how often a woman has come to me who only has their TSH and their T4, maybe their T3 tested.
Mm-hmm.
And then they'll come in and I'll test their antibodies and they're off the charts. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like how much could have been prevented all these years if we had just tested this ahead of time?
Mm-hmm.
So, proper getting the proper blood work done is important.
Yes.
So all of those things. And then I'll say that specifically when it comes to miscarriages, in addition to all of those, what I also look at is inflammation. Inflammation is huge because that, again, is not kind of dismissed by the conventional community, unfortunately, but it plays a huge role. So the way I like to describe inflammation is like you can think of just like this underlying kind of swelling, just irritation that's happening at the cellular level. So as you can imagine, if that's happening in our trillions of cells, then of course the uterine lining is probably going to be impacted as well. So then how is that going to hold that baby, protect that baby, grow that baby? So that's one of the areas I look at as well a lot, because I've noticed that a lot of the inflammatory markers that I check are elevated in those cases. The other big one that a lot of people don't realize is that sperm is 50% of the equation. And we now know that sperm quality has been correlated with an increased risk for miscarriage. So again, a lot of times men's health, men's sperm quality hasn't been assessed until there's been multiple miscarriages or, fertility issues for a period of time.
So we're wondering what the guy's role is in with the fertility side of things, because a lot of times we focus on the woman and think that it's just the woman, but I think the guys play a significant role from what I've learned from you. So what are some things that you've seen with the men when people are experiencing infertility, or what things that the guys can be doing too to help out?
Yeah, it's such a good question again, because sperm is 50% of the equation. And so likely a lot of times women or couples don't really think about the role that the husband's health is playing as a part of the sperm quality. And we now know from research that sperm quality has everything to do with embryo quality and the ability to conceive and health of pregnancy and all of that. And so we also know that poor sperm quality is linked to increased risk for miscarriage. So it's very important. And with men, what I've noticed is that a lot of times when I analyze and kind of see what's going on in their blood work, I'll see significant inflammation, and I will see, again, digestive absorption issues. Sometimes there'll be some blood sugar dysregulation, and so their insulin will be a lot higher than it should be. That can impact the quality of their sperm, because, again, everything's connected to everything. And so it's so important for the guy to also kind of get his health assessed, see what's going on, see if there's anything that needs to be addressed, because it will and can impact the quality of his sperm. And that may not necessarily show up in a semen analysis, right? Because they can't directly assess semen quality in a semen analysis. It's more just count and kind of how it looks, the morphology and motility and stuff like that. So it's kind of very basic markers, generic markers that the semen analysis can evaluate, but those are a reflection of the quality of the man's health. And so it's so important for the guy to kind of do his part as well and see if there's anything going on and get those things addressed around at the same time as his partner, because it's so interesting. Sperm also has a similar timeline. So although men are constantly making and brand new sperm, the timeline is around the same, which is around 100 days. So it's so great, right? And so it's a great mindset to get into, that, all right, if we're planning to start thinking about a baby, the minimum time that we need is at least 3 months to make impact change in terms of quality of sperm, quality of eggs, and things like that. And if there's things going on, if there's specific imbalances or deficiencies, then it could be longer. So it's a really good idea to see what's going on and start addressing those things if needed, instead of waiting until there's an issue with fertility or with miscarriages or things like that. So,
Oh, that's so important too. And I think it's kind of cool in a way, because it's bringing the guy into that a lot more than I think most people would think when they think like, oh, it's pretty much all about the girl. And it's like, well, no, it's not, after hearing kind of what you're sharing. And so I think it's a cool way for the guys to still get involved and knowing that they do have an impact on the outcome as well, and kind of taking that ownership.
Exactly. It's all about taking ownership, being a part of the process, approaching fertility as a partnership, as a team. Yeah. And I'm so happy that we have more research backing all this up. So now it provides that kind of validity that sometimes men need to be like, okay, I get it. Because it is interesting. Lately, I've had a lot more men making the initial call to reach out to me. They're like, hey, we want to know what we can do. And I was like, this is fantastic. More men are, being proactive about their health as a couple for fertility. And I think that's amazing.
Oh, that's so good. That's awesome. So we're going to transition to a question that I like to ask all of my guests, especially because you work with women across all ages. What is the topic of, I wish I would have known sooner, that if you could share some more about it, which I feel like we've talked about a lot of things today, but if there's something that you've found people have mentioned, I wish I would have known that sooner, what would that be, so that we can let people know sooner?
Yeah. It's kind of sums up everything we've been talking about. Most of the time they'll tell me, oh, I wish I'd found you a year ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, instead of going through 10 failed IVF cycles, 2 IUIs, whatever the case may be. It's like a lot of times they're just like, oh, I wish I'd found you earlier and found out what was going on with me before starting all of these more invasive treatments that may or may not have been necessary. And so, and I'm just like, oh, but I'm glad you found me now. So at least we're able to do what we can in the time that we're given, depending on, their age and where they are, if they've already, chosen to do IVF or wherever they are. It's just like, I have to decide, okay, what we can do in that amount of time. And, but there's always something that can be done. So that's probably the key message, is just always remembering that always start with your health, your balance before thinking about conception and pregnancy, because it always starts with you first. So take a step back and focus on yourself.
I love that. I love that. So before we ask the last question for today, I wanted to have you share where people can connect with you, because I believe you do a lot more like virtual stuff as well. And so I want people to know, especially if you're listening and you're like, well, I don't know if I could go see her in her office, but she's actually doing virtual. So I would love for people to know where they can connect with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. I am completely virtual, so it doesn't really matter. And so my website is zamawellness.com. And that's a great way to kind of learn more about me and reach out to me through the contact form. And then also I'm on Facebook at Zama Wellness. And then Instagram is at Fertility Doctor. And I also have an online, foundations fertility course. And so that's a great way for couples to kind of dive in and just start taking back kind of control of their fertility, their health, and starting to optimize things. So that's a great way to kind of enter my world. And then they can also get their blood work analysis done. So all that information is on my website. So
perfect. I'll include that in the show notes too, so people can connect with you. All right. So last question we have for you. So you are at your favorite coffee shop in the area and you're waiting in line, and there's a young mom that's standing in front of you, and she turns around and she's like, Dr. Reena, she's like, what advice would you give to me? I'm a new mom and I'm struggling with starting to find like my health again and finding that balance and new routine as a mother. What advice would you give? You have 60 seconds.
I would tell her to set the stage, create balance for herself, making sure that she takes time out for herself twice a day. That could be 10 minutes twice a day, but creating that routine starts early on. So as soon as you have your baby and young babies and all that, you're just pulled in so many different directions. But if you set the stage that you are going to take 10 minutes to yourself twice a day and just to ground yourself and rebalance, it's everything. So take a step back and tune in and just take time for yourself.
Love that. Love that. Especially I think with, like you were saying, as new moms, I think they feel like they're, like you said, torn and brought all these places all over the place of where they need to be and what things they need to be doing, but to, again, fill your cup first and then you can fill others.
That's right. That's right.
Love it. I love that advice. Well, Reena, thank you so much for being on the show. I appreciate you taking the time today to answer all those questions and just so much more. I think just to have more of that conversation about that there's more options, and when people are experiencing fertility roadblocks, and just finding that there's natural ways to go about it and just to seek out help. So I'm really excited for this episode for people to hear about the work that you're doing, and that hopefully they can connect with you if they're in need of some of those services. I'm excited.
Oh, thanks so much for having me on. It was great. It was a pleasure to share and have this conversation with you.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Postpartum Performance Podcast. I appreciate you taking the time to listen, learn, and grow. If this is your first time tuning in, thank you so much for being here. The aim of this podcast is to provide oodles of the best possible content to help empower women, eliminate the phrase, I wish I would have known sooner around pelvic health, and to encourage personal growth through the postpartum journey to becoming the best version of yourself. If you enjoyed the show and found the content helpful, please remember to subscribe to the podcast and leave a 5-star review. These subscriptions and reviews help other mothers discover the podcast. If you're a regular listener, thank you. I encourage you to tell a friend about us or post on social media sharing your favorite part for today's show. If you're looking for more content like this, please follow me on Instagram at Postpartum Performance. Remember, mothers, if you're seeking to live life strong, I'm here with you in your corner. Continue to be brave, stay strong, and live confidently.